What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I try and help you guys keep on top of the macro developments coming out of the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. For those who are watching for the first time, a big part of my job requires that I follow those macro developments. So if that is something that you are interested in, and if you want to be just as informed as my clients, maybe consider subscribing. Everyone else, welcome. It's a midweek episode, so it's a little bit shorter as always. Actually, this episode, there are just basically 3 stories that I wanted to touch on. A mini story at the end of the episode, an update on the outbreak situation in the north of China up first, but in the middle, we're really going to dive into the economic data that was released on Monday from the National Bureau of Statistics and look at reactions and really analyze what this economic data tells us about China's economic performance in 2020 and what its policy directions or concerns will be going into 2021. So that's what we'll be discussing on this midweek episode. As always, if you enjoy the episode, guys, it's a huge help if you smash the like button, and a big thank you to my Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome. I'm just a small channel, but to have you guys support at this point is very humbling. So thank you very much. So without any further ado, let's jump into this week's China Update. Okay, first up, let's talk about the outbreak situation in the north. The north of China continues to see sporadic outbreaks with approximately 100 official new local cases being reported by the government every day. These are in the northeast provinces of Jilin, which borders North Korea, and Heilongjiang, as well as the northern province of Hebei, which hugs the capital, and Beijing itself. While outside of these regions, the situation does seem to be under control at present, I can say anecdotally that there is a rising sense of anxiety here from regular people that things could get worse. Currently, 11 regions and over 23 million people are currently under lockdown. Some people have claimed that the situation is not a lockdown, but even state-run nationalistic outlets have called a spade a spade. Quote, local governments did not use the term lockdown in their official notices, but are adopting measures similar to lockdowns, which usually mean residents are asked not to go out. End quote. While the speed in which China has been able to mass test its citizens has been impressive over the last few months, we need to look at these within context and recognize that there have also been some serious issues identified that need to be addressed. For example, authorities in the city of Xingtai said that the director of the Jinan Huaxi Medical Laboratory has been detained for falsifying data. It was discovered that the laboratory, which is tasked with processing hundreds of thousands of samples, couldn't process the number of samples required of it, and so falsified the data. Xingtai is currently experiencing an outbreak and is under lockdown. As of the filming of this video, at least 24 provinces, including all of the Tier 1 cities in China, have issued notices urging people to stay home during the Spring Festival, which falls on February 12th. In a sign that is making some nervous too, state media is reporting that China is building 6 makeshift hospitals. Sorry, I just realized that means 6 in Chinese. 5 plus 1 is 6. Each with 1,500 rooms in Nangong, a city south of Beijing in Hebei province. The first was completed over the weekend in less than 5 days. It could be that Beijing is simply preparing for the worst, or it could be that they see a surge coming. Okay, next up, let's talk about the economy. So we have the official Q4 data, so we can look at the official 2020 economic performance of the PRC, and we can look at the various reactions to the data. According to the National Bureau of Statistics, the gross domestic product, GDP of China, saw 2.3% growth in 2020. While this growth rate was the lowest since 1976, it's still higher than the International Monetary Fund's projection of a 1.9% increase, and higher than any other major economy in 2020. Industrial output was a major driver of growth in December, seeing a faster than expected rate of 7.3% year on year. It appears that steel production, which was at its highest output level in history, played a big part in that. However, consumption growth was the most disappointing, with a worse than expected 4.6% increase in retail sales year on year in December, down from 5% from the previous month. In fact, retail sales, which is often used by economists as a proxy for consumption, was down 3.4% last year, the first official contraction in retail sales since 1968. If there isn't another major outbreak and national lockdown, then we may see a modest recovery in consumption in Q1 of this year as household consumer confidence increases and household savings decreases, and that decrease is used on increased consumption or retail spending. Domestic state media, of course, has trumpeted the numbers. Xinhua quoted the head of the National Bureau of Statistics as saying, quote, "These achievements show that China's economic, scientific, and comprehensive strengths have leapt by another big step," end quote. The milestone of Chinese GDP reaching 100 trillion RMB was also celebrated in media this week. In an English language commentary designed for an international audience published by state-run Xinhua, the outlet described China's economic performance as, quote, "a beacon of hope for the world," end quote. However, if you look past the main headlines for mainstream consumption, top Chinese economists and think tankers are also expressing concern at the numbers, particularly the numbers around retail spending or consumption. The Chinese language People's Republic of China outlet Economic Information Daily interviewed several government think tank economists who pointed out that consumption only contributed 39% of China's economic growth in 2019, lower than the global average contribution rate of 60%. It also appears to be the consensus that consumption likely did not contribute at all to China's 2020 economic growth. We all know, of course, Xi Jinping's flagship economic policy from last year is the so-called dual circulation model, where domestic consumption becomes the main driver of economic growth, allowing for sustainable long-term growth. So these concerns around consumption will likely be shared by top economic officials in Beijing. Rural households, accounting for over 600 million people in the PRC, were hit particularly hard in 2020. A report published a few days ago by the County Governance Research Center of Beijing-based Tsinghua University's School of Social Sciences concluded that almost 1/3, 30% of non-urban households suffered a drop in wages last year. Now, jumping from Tsinghua University to Peking University, China finance expert and Peking University professor Michael Pettis, someone I have quoted on here several times before in the past, was also unimpressed by Monday's data. Quote, "It is a little frustrating to see the response many analysts had to the GDP growth data Chinese released today. These numbers aren't especially good, and they certainly shouldn't have been surprising. Back in April and May, when most analysts were projecting negative or barely positive GDP growth for China in 2020, the OECD, for example, expected China's GDP to contract by 3.7%, I insisted that GDP growth for 2020 would be positive and probably between 2 to 3%. Today, it was reported as 2.3%. How did I know? Because I knew that while most of the healthy sources of Chinese growth would contract, except for exports, which would expand given the intense supply-side response to the impact of COVID-19, Beijing was going to respond to a significant worsening of the healthy parts of the economy by unleashing enough of the unhealthy, non-productive growth it has long tried to constrain, basically real estate and infrastructure investment, in order to achieve as much economic activity as it needed for domestic political ends. And that is exactly what happened." After some discussion, he went on to conclude, quote, China, performed badly, like the rest of the world. And it is only because Beijing sharply increased all the things it has been trying to rein in that GDP measure was able to rise. That's like saying that if I can run faster after smoking a big bowl of crystal meth, it means I am healthier than I thought. To say that China was the only major economy to grow in 2020, in other words, is only to say that we are unable to distinguish between GDP and the economy. End quote. And one last story before we end this midweek episode, shorter episode of China Update. The Hong Kong-based South China Morning Post wrote an excellent article about a speech delivered by Chen Yixin, Secretary General of the Central Political and Legal Affairs Commission, a very high-level official, on Monday. I believe that the South China Morning Post is correct in viewing that speech as a symbol of the current zeitgeist of triumphalism in Beijing currently. Quote, "This address by Chen gives us a good measure of how confident the leaders are about the situation and what their concerns are and how they see the difference between stable governance in China and chaos and turmoil in the West." End quote. Let's have a look at what Chen said. Quote, "The rise of China is a major variable, which is both an independent variable and a dependent variable. And the international development trajectory, that is the trend of a rising east, declining west, is favorable to us. China is entering a new stage of development, moving towards the second centennial goal. The people's demand for a better life is growing, and the remarkable advantages of our national system and governance system are increasingly evident. However, China is still in the primary stage of socialism and will remain so for the long term. It is still the world's largest developing country. Unbalanced and insufficient development is still prominent, and we still face many difficulties and challenges. As I have expressed several times over the last few years of following China developments, if you operate in an environment in which the scope of acceptable discourse and debate surrounding important public policy issues is continuously restricted, and this is reinforced through top-down media control and thus narrative control, then there is a serious risk of overestimating one's strengths and underestimating challenges and weaknesses. And if this happens, it can increase overall systemic risk and lead to policy mistakes and miscalculations. And of course, triumphalism, if misplaced, has another name in English: hubris. Okay guys, that's our China update for this week, the midweek episode at least. Hopefully I'll see you guys in a few days for the next episode, the longer episode at the end of the week. Wherever you are, I hope you're staying safe and staying sane. I will see you guys next time on China Update.